Just in case you're wondering, my phone is on. I think last week it went off. It's on buzz though, but I wanted to leave it here in case Jerry called. So if I stop, I will explain myself. I want to talk to you this morning about a brand new world. I had the opportunity to go down to Chi Alpha last Monday and spend some time. Just tremendous to be with Joe and his team. Rachel wasn't there. It was his turn to be with the kids, and I think they're running 40 or 50 young people at this point in time. Of course, they've been doing this long enough now that some of the kids from last year are there or from several years ago. So it's just a great time together, and I had a chance to share with them, and what I shared, I want to share with you. I just sort of added a little bit to it as I have thought more about the topic. And the topic is a brave new world. A brave new world. On the website for the environmental group Greenpeace, you will find the recipe for a brand new world. I was very impressed by the way they could articulate the values, the things they wanted to do, to see happen in order to make the world the way they felt it ought to be. And actually, if you read those values, they are, for the most part, things that probably none of us would have any argument about. They want to catalyze an energy revolution. They want to defend our oceans. They want to protect the world's ancient forests, the animals and plants and people that depend on them. They want to work for disarmament and peace. They want to create a toxic-free future with safer alternatives to hazardous chemicals, and campaign for sustainable agriculture, finding ways to help our soils grow good things rather than relying on practices that actually harm the earth. Now, every one of those points, energy, the oceans, the forests, disarmament, getting rid of hazardous chemicals, and sustaining our farmlands, all of those do two things for us. They point to something that's wrong, and they point to the way it could be, how something could be better. They point out things that these folks feel are drastically wrong with our present world. They say, in effect, the world's broken, or at least the way we treat the world is broken. We're making a mess of our world. But rather than just pointing out all of the things that are wrong, this group is saying, this is how we would fix it. This is how we would make the world the way it ought to be. So I want you to imagine with me a fictitious scene. Obviously, this will probably never happen. But what would happen if the head of Greenpeace, the executive director, a South African named Kumi Naidoo, and all of his senior management team, the people who make the strategic decisions for Greenpeace, the people who raise the money and who are the flag bearers of this preeminent and very radical environmental organization, what would happen if Kumi Naidoo and his senior management team were seen in New York City getting into a stretch limousine with a whole bunch of big oil and big coal fat cats to go out for dinner? Can you imagine the scene? All of them squeezing in. The limo pulls up to the fanciest restaurant in town. They open the door, they're getting out, laughing and joking and patting each other on the back. They go in and they order the $200 or more a bottle of wine. And of course, it's a 7-course meal with all the fixins. And they're just in there as cozy as can be. And at the end of the evening, the executive director of Greenpeace pulls out the Greenpeace credit card and says, "It's on us." How do you think the internet would handle that the next morning? Can you just see the buzz, the blogosphere or whatever? Can you imagine the outrage? Can you imagine the shock of people looking and seeing the standard bearers of the purest form of environmentalism, standing there, sitting there, shoulder to shoulder with the arch enemies of the earth, all enjoying themselves? Can imagine the things they would be asking. What could he have possibly been thinking? Was he just a fake all along? Did he kind of work his way up into this organization just so he could go do that? Has he bought off or been bought off by some oil company somewhere so they can go make some more money? Is he just a huckster? What kind of message is he sending to the thousands or even millions of people who make huge sacrifices to change the world? Well, one day, a rabbi in what is now northern Israel went out for a walk. He came to the toll booth at the border between the region where he lived and the neighboring region. Sitting there in the toll booth was a man named Levi. Now, Levi was a Jewish man, we can tell by his name, and he was working in one of the most despised professions of his time. He made his money by collecting tolls. The Gospels call him a tax collector, but technically he was a toll collector. What was going on was that there was a border between two regions of the Roman Empire that were governed by different individuals. In this case, a man named Herod Antipas was the ruler, or the king, if you will, of Galilee, and his brother Philip ruled the neighboring area. So to go from one place to the other, you had to pay a toll. Thank you very much. Every time you went across to visit your extended family or to do some trading or to buy some stuff, you had to pay a toll. And every time you came back, you had to pay a toll. And that's one of the ways the government made its money. Now, this would have been especially frustrating back then because prior to Herod Antipas and Philip being in charge, their father had been in charge, Herod the Great. And it had all been one kingdom without toll booths inside of it. And so now, all of a sudden, it would be sort of like having somebody decide that every time you went to New York or New Hampshire or Massachusetts, when you left the state of Vermont, you had to go through a toll booth. Let's not say that too loudly. It'll probably sound like a good idea to somebody. Just to get in and out of the states. Now, what made it worse was that the way that the government set this up was that they subcontracted the toll collecting. All they did was say to a person like Levi, you can have that position for X amount of shekels or whatever. It'll cost you this much a year. How much you make charging people to go back and forth is your problem. So what do you think they did? Well, if you were enterprising and if you were a cheat, you would get that job, you would pay what it cost to have the job, and then charge whatever you wanted. We know of another such individual named Zacchaeus in the Gospel of Luke who charged people exorbitant rates, not only for getting in and out of the region, but also the customs duty on the stuff that they were carrying around. I can well remember when Sue and I were overseas, we had to go to a neighboring country if we wanted to buy virtually anything. So we would make our little trip with the van and buy all sorts of things. And then you had to come back and go through customs. You know, you knew when you got there that the customs agents were not really interested in collecting duty for the government 1,500 miles away. What they really wanted was just something for them. And you had to run that gauntlet every time. Well, that's what Levi was in the middle of. He was one of those kinds of people. And as a result, he was hated by his society. Jews that entered this customs service, this toll collecting service, were written off as outcasts from the society. It was social suicide to take this job. It made you rich, but at the cost of all of your relationships. You were disqualified as a judge or a witness, which means that you had no standing in court at all. You were excommunicated from the synagogue, which means you had no standing with God at all. And you were seen as a disgrace to your family, which means you had no standing with your family at all. You were just, therefore, in it for yourself and on your own. So the rabbi, Jesus of Nazareth, goes up to the toll booth and does the one thing no one would ever have imagined. He invites the toll collector, Levi, to become one of his close followers. We read in Mark chapter 2, verses 13 and 14, once more Jesus went out beside the sea. All the crowd came to him, and he taught them. As he went along, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the toll booth. Follow me, he said, and he got up and followed him. Now, let's just put this in perspective. This same person, Jesus of Nazareth, had recently burst upon the scene with a radical message. We read in Mark chapter 1, verse 15, this was Jesus' core message. The time is fulfilled. God's kingdom is arriving. Turn back and believe the good news. You see, like the bold agenda of Greenpeace or any other organization that wants to change the world, Jesus was saying that the time to fix a broken world had already begun and had started with him. A new age was dawning. It was time to get on board. That would require breaking with the past, embracing this brand new thing that God was doing, daring to believe in a new reality. And so he recruits a toll collector? Well, the next scene takes us even deeper into what Jesus was doing and what kind of response that caused. The next scene shows us Jesus at a party, not only with Levi, but with a whole bunch of Levi's friends. We read in verse 15. That's how Jesus came to be sitting at home with lots of tax collectors and sinners. There they were, plenty of them, sitting with Jesus and his disciples. They had become his followers. Now, remember that little scene I set for you of this ardent environmentalist, probably the leader of the most important, well-known and controversial environmental group in the world. I painted a scene of him sitting down for dinner with the head of ExxonMobil and Shell and BP and a whole bunch of them, having a great big deal all on the house, that is, all on Greenpeace. And what of a shock that would be. Well, try to think of that in terms of Jesus sitting down for dinner. There are his other disciples somewhere in the room, we presume, or at least in the doorway. But all around Jesus are these people that were considered literally the scum of the earth. Tax collectors, and it says sinners, which means people who just didn't keep the rules, didn't even think about it, didn't care about it. Dinner was done in the style of the fanciest and most luxurious meal of the time. Instead of sitting as you and I would do, and as they normally did, sitting in a chair at a table, that was the normal way of eating, they were reclining, we're told, which means there was a low table, lots of pillows and cushions, and every one of the diners lay there on the floor, like in the pictures of the Roman banquets, dropping grapes and raisins in, the whole deal. It was very luxurious. It was very laid back. It was a time to just enjoy and feel like this was the greatest thing that ever happened. So what was this meal all about? Because this was a very deliberate thing on Jesus' part, that he would take part in this with these folks. Well, for Jesus, this meal was far more than an experiment in hanging out with society's misfits and outcasts. Jesus was providing a picture of the very new world that he said was coming. Think about a newly crowned king back in those days, hosting his court in the grand hall. The king issues an invitation. To be invited means to be welcomed as a treasured and valued member of this new regime, of this new order, of this new kingdom. We see the same thing when the president is inaugurated, and then there's a presidential ball. And to even get a ticket to that event and to be invited is a big deal. It's probably the one time in a person's life that they may be around that many special people. Well, Jesus was having the inaugural ball, if you will, the inaugural banquet. To be invited meant you're part of the family. And that's what Jesus was saying when he invited the toll collectors and the sinners. Jesus was acting out God's return to his people. Long, long ago, and all through various parts of the Old Testament, the Bible describes the time when God would come to make things right as a wonderful banquet for his people. In Isaiah, we read these words in Isaiah 65:13, and they have a double edge to them. Therefore, this is the message from the Master God. My servants will eat, and you'll go hungry. My servants will drink, and you'll go thirsty. My servants will rejoice, and you'll hang your heads. You might hear some echoes to the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes, where Jesus talks about how those that were hungry will be satisfied, and those that were mourning will be joyful. God would come and put out a huge spread the way the king would do for his people. Now, all of this was way too much for one very focused group of people, the Pharisees. Think about that scene I described for you of the head of Greenpeace with the fat cats from oil and gas and fracking and coal mines and the whole deal. Who's going to be upset about that? Needless to say, somewhere out there ready to start working the internet are a host of people who see themselves as the caretakers of the truth, as the protectors of the integrity of these values that their organization is supposed to be upholding. Well, the same thing was true in Jesus' day. There was a group of people who took it upon themselves to make sure everybody did everything just right. They were called the Pharisees. This group of people, the Pharisees, was a sect within Judaism, and they were devoted to ushering in a brand new world. That was the one thing that they wanted to see happen. It would be a world based on God's promises, the promises he made to Abraham and to the Jewish people. It was based on the idea that God's coming back. He's going to be the judge. He's going to be the savior. He's going to fix this broken world. He's going to make it the way it's supposed to be. God had made a covenant, a solemn promise to the Jewish people. He'd set the terms for being faithful to the promise. He'd given them this thing called the law, or what they called Torah, basically the first 5 books of our Bible. And he had said, here, in these books, in these writings, you find what you need to do to be faithful to your side of this bargain. The law spelled out what it meant to be God's partners. The way of life it put before them did not make them God's people, but it identified them as God's people. You think about it, nothing that the Jewish people ever did made them chosen. They were chosen. That was God's grace, God's gift to all of us when he said, I'm going to work through this one group of people, first this man and then his family and then these tribes and eventually this kingdom. I'm going to work through them to bring my Savior to the whole human race. But how would you know who they were, that special group? Well, he gave them these special identifiers, a special form of diet, a special sign of this covenant in their male children, certain days to be honored. So they would maintain their identity and not just be blended into the rest of the world and be lost and forgotten. Keeping the rules then didn't make you special before God. It showed that you already were special for God. Let me give you an example. On my hand here, I have a little gold band, which has been there for, praise God, 39 years now. I received this ring from Suzanne, and she received one from me back on September the 7th, 1973. Now, question. Did the ring make me married, or do I wear the ring because I am married? The ring is a sign, it's a badge of something much more special. The ring didn't make somebody fall in love with me or make me fall in love with someone else. The greatest gift, short of knowing Jesus, the greatest gift in my life is that this one other human being, Suzanne, chose to put her life together with mine. She gave herself to me and I to her. That's a gift of grace that came through God igniting love in our hearts. The ring and everything that goes with it, being faithful and showing acts of kindness to each other, loving each other and caring for each other, all of those things are a badge that we are married and are celebrating that reality. See, just being nice to somebody doesn't mean you're married. Wearing a ring doesn't make a deep relationship, but it's a badge of that. And when God gave his law to his people, he didn't say, keep these rules so you can earn my favor. He said, you already have my favor. Show that you accept it. Wear the ring. Wear the badge. And so for the Pharisees, they were so determined to have the wedding ring, to have that badge that said, God, we're with you. We're faithful to you. We're ready for you. We're making things right so you can come. So they said, the only way to do this is to really bear down on these markers of what it means to be God's people. The law, keeping it. And they did an interesting thing. They kept it to the extreme. Now they did it on purpose. They actually had a statement, a way of describing their strategy. It went like this: we're going to build a fence around the law. And what that meant was that if God said don't do X, well then they would create rules that were even more stringent, that if you didn't break those, you'd never get to the rule that God said. For instance, Let's suppose you're going to drive to Burlington. Well, you get up on the interstate, and before too long, you're going to see a sign that says speed limit 65, right? Well, now let's suppose you're really OCD about speeding. So you're going to set your cruise control, but you set it at 60. Even though the speed limit's 65. Now, what are the chances of getting caught for speeding if you're at 60? Not going to happen. I mean, you are overcompensating, and you're saying, well, even if my cruise control is off by a mile, I won't be going 66, I'll be going 61. And you'll be happier. And then when it goes to 55, you drop down to 50. Well, that's what they were doing. They overcompensated the rules so as to be absolutely sure that they were blameless before God. When you read about Paul, Paul talks about himself as having been blameless. It doesn't mean he never sinned, but it means he kept the rules so rigorously you'd never catch him speeding. And that was their badge. That was their way of saying, God, we have fixed things up. You can come back. So how do you think they feel when there they are doing 60 on the interstate on a nice, bright, sunny day, and a bunch of social misfits go by on their Harleys at 102? And who's out in front of them? Jesus. Talk about breaking the rules. Didn't you know that we... And they're looking and going, what on earth could he possibly be thinking? We've taken all this time to fix things up so that God would see that we're celebrating this relationship that he has and we're ready for him. And then Jesus goes and has dinner with this bunch of people that have no clue and don't even care about who God is or what he's doing. Chapter 2, verse 16, they turn to the disciples and just try to hear the quivering in their voices. They are so upset. When the legal experts from the Pharisees saw him eating with tax collectors and sinners, they said to his disciples, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? You see, by doing that, he was going in exactly the opposite direction from everything it seems that God had said. Well, Jesus replied with a little story, a little parable, verse 17. When Jesus heard it, he said to them, it's the sick people who need the doctor, not the healthy ones. I came to call the bad people, not the good ones. Now think about that with me. What was he saying? One possibility is he was saying, listen, chill out, guys. You're okay. We're just trying to get these other people on board, and I'm just going to hang out with them and build a relationship and bring them around. That's one possibility. Would sort of be what I would call the tidy up the messy world possibility. Yeah, you know, you guys have sort of got it halfway fixed, but we got to get these other people in too, or else God's going to see the mess they're making, so we're just kind of trying to horn them in. There's another more ironic possibility. Jesus said, it's the sick people who need the doctor, not the healthy ones. Did you ever know anybody who was sick but didn't want to admit it? I don't need a doctor. They might have needed a doctor, but as long as they told themselves, I'm not sick, I'm not going there. I don't want anybody poking around. I don't want anybody running tests on me. They're going to tell themselves they're healthy, even when they're not. And that's probably what Jesus was saying to these Pharisees. You guys think you have it all figured out. You think that somehow you're going to put the whole world together just right so that God will come back and say, thank you very much. I couldn't have done it without you. And Jesus is saying, at least these people that you call sinners, they've heard what I was talking about. They want to turn their lives around. They want to make some changes. They know they're broken. They know they're sick. They know they need the doctor. That's the ones I came for. Came for the people that would be willing to let me come and begin to bring that new world to them right now. So what kind of a new world would that be? Well, For one thing, a whole bunch of distinctions are going to go by the wayside. No more automatically dividing the human race into the good guys and the bad guys based on human systems, based on somebody's idea of the rules, based on somebody saying, I'm going to drive 60 instead of 65, so anybody who goes 62 is automatically a bad person. Instead, now God is recreating people. He's not asking to recreate the rules. He's not asking to recreate new systems of religion. He's saying, let's just start at where the problem is. Let's make people brand new, regardless of where they come from, regardless of what their background is. Think about what it's like to go on to fly somewhere around the country. You go to the airport, you got your ticket, maybe you got your boarding pass the night before, or unless you go and put your credit card in, it prints it out. So now you're armed with this boarding pass. You go to the appropriate, once you got through security, you go to the appropriate gate, and there you sit, maybe for a little while, maybe for hours, with a bunch of other people, probably all strangers. Some of them are sipping coffee, some of them are on their phones, somebody's got a laptop going, somebody's reading the paper, a few of them are talking, there's at least one person trying to sleep. And you wait until the ticket agent or the boarding agent stands there at the little counter and announces that flight 1273 or whatever is ready to begin boarding. And then what does everybody do? Well, they all pull out this little piece of paper. And they all check it and they look at it and they wait. And of course, the boarding proceeds down its normal pattern. First of all, first class and people with children, you know, the whole deal. And you wait for your little time to come, and then you stand in line. Now, here's a question for you. To get on the plane at that point, what do you have to do? Only thing I've ever had to do was give them that little piece of paper. Scan it, they give it back, down the jetway. I have never once had anybody in the airline industry, as I was standing in line to get on that plane, ask me where I was coming from. Never had anybody say, well, are you from Vermont? Most of them haven't heard of Vermont. But nobody says, well, what airport did you come from to get here? Well, what kind of plane were you on? Well, did you sit in the front or the back? Well, what do you do for work anyway? Why do you think you can be on? No one ever does that. All they want to see is the boarding pass and whether I am ticketed for the destination. It doesn't matter who we are. It was funny, one time I was in the Dulles International Airport, Washington, D.C., and it was one of those little dinky planes. You know, the only way you get back to Vermont is in a little dinky plane. And guess who sat in the dinky plane with us? Bernie. God bless him. There he was, there we were. Still needs a comb. Just kidding. And I bet you he had a boarding pass. That's all it takes. And you see what Jesus was saying? It's not about where you came from. It's not about what trip got you from there to this moment of decision. It's not about how big of a mess you are. It's not about what job you had or even have. You're a tax collector. Who cares? Oh, it's the worst job. Oh, he's excommunicated from the... Who cares? Who cares what he was? Where's he going? Oh, but she did this in her former... Oh, but he did that. Oh, but if you kind of knew what they said when... Who cares? Honestly, you get in that plane, nobody ever says, you were in Atlanta? What were you doing in Atlanta? Nobody cares where you were going. You're from what? You're from where? No, it's like, we're going to Vermont, or we're going to Chicago, or we're going wherever we're going, and then life goes that way. And Jesus says, all aboard. We're boarding the flight to the new world that God is creating. Boarding passes, please. Look at verse 15 with me again. That's how Jesus came to be sitting at home with lots of tax collectors and sinners. There they were, plenty of them sitting with Jesus and his disciples. Oh, I love these words, italics this time. They had become his followers. And Jesus is saying, do you want to know what the brave new world looks like? Look around. I know that if Jesus were to physically manifest here today, he would say the same thing. Do you want to know what the brave new world looks like? Look around. Go ahead, look around. Are we a hodgepodge or what? Yeah. Does it matter what we were? No. The only thing that matters is, do you have your boarding pass? Yep. That's all that matters. That's all that matters. And you see, Jesus redefined the boarding pass. It was no longer that you kept the ethnic traditions, as precious as they were and as important as they had been for that some 1,000, 1,500 years. Now he was saying, we have a new way to check in. It's not based on where you were or where you came from or how long your ancestry was. It's not based on that. It's based on where you're going. Because God has now opened the jetway to the plane that is his new kingdom. And the boarding pass now is, will you put your trust in me? Jesus is the one that would die for all that sin and all of that guilt and all those ways that people disqualified themselves from being part of God's family. He said, that's on me. All the tickets are already purchased. But you got to trust me enough to have that little piece of paper. Now you think about it. Here you are. Oh, you're in San Francisco and you want to get to Vermont. So you got to go through, let's say, Newark. All right? What's that cost one way? 5, 6, 7? Okay, that's all been done. Somebody bought you a ticket. You never even saw the money. All you do is go up and stick a credit card in a little thing, and a piece of paper comes out. Can you imagine? You really think you're going to go to Newark with that piece of paper? Yep. Do you think they'll let you on that plane? How do they know you're who you are and you paid and on and on and on? You got the piece of paper, you get on the plane. Just the piece of paper. Think about it. How simple is that? It's a little thing this big. You can print it at home with a Hertz ad on it, for crying out loud. That's an act of faith, don't you think? To show up at an airport at 4:30 in the morning with all your stuff and think that because you have this little dinky piece of paper, they're going to let you fly all the way across the country? People do it all day long. That paper doesn't make you fly. That paper isn't worth 2 cents. It shows that you have the faith to believe that the ticket that somebody bought, you or somebody else, is good, that the airline is good, that the plane is good, and that, yep, here's my paper, please put me in Newark. If we could do that for a flight to Newark, what about having that faith that God has welcomed us into his family because of what Jesus did for us? That's all he asks for. And that's a brave new world. Let's bow our heads together. Father, make it simple for us. Break that root of fear, that fear of trying to please you, of trying to earn your love. Break those ties of guilt, things that we've done and said that haunt us. Break those places of unforgiveness where we would wait for someone to somehow change before they could start the new journey or share it with us. Lord, let us see that it all comes down to leaving behind what we were. Just as everybody evacuates that gate area, nothing left but coffee cups and crumpled newspapers, and they're out of there. Well, Lord, let us just be out of there with that old world that we came from. And with you, traveling with you into that new relationship in your family. Father, I pray if there's any one person here who says, I want to be part of God's family. I just don't think I'm good enough. I don't think I've done enough. I don't think I've paid enough. Lord, speak to that person right now. Jesus paid it all. The ticket's paid for. You just have to believe in the boarding pass. You just have to say, here, this is my trust that Jesus paid for my sin and opened the door to eternal life for me. That's all I have to do. and I can begin that journey. I'm going to ask you just to think for a moment with me right now. Your head's bowed, your eyes closed. Have you printed your boarding pass? It's not about the past. It's the past to the future that God has for you. Future that begins the moment you put your trust in Him. Have you printed that boarding pass? Is that the only thing you're counting on right now to be part of God's family? Because let me tell you, if there's anything else, you're going to have to leave it at the gate. If you're not sure, let's just say a prayer together. And let's just all pray this together. Dear God, I believe that Jesus is your Son. He came to this earth to pay for my failures, so that when I trust in Him for your forgiveness, I become part of your family. I make my faith my boarding pass. That's all I have to give you, Lord. I couldn't fix myself if I tried. But I trust you. I trust you to love me. I trust you to forgive me. I trust you to give me new life. I trust you to make me your child. Thank you. Let's stand together. If what we've talked about here this morning is in any way new to you, I would love to spend some time with you and go deeper into all of this. Next Sunday, I'll start with my Connect class. Suzanne and I will meet with people who are interested in just growing and knowing Jesus, perhaps learning some more about our church. But it starts with this, the boarding pass. So, love to see you at that time. Let's sing together.